The city was eating itself alive. It is September 1792. Paris is not the city of light. It is a city of shadows, of whispers, of torchlit fog that clings to the cobblestones like a shroud. The air itself is thick, metallic with the scent of fear and the distant sour smell of wine. There is a sound beneath the frantic tolling of Paris bells, beneath the rain. It is the sound of a crowd, but this is not a collection of voices. It is a single guttural roar. It is the sound of 1,000 grievances, 1,000,000 frustrations, sharpening themselves into a single blade. The revolution, which had begun with the promise of liberty, was now demanding blood. And on this day, it would seek out a symbol, not a king, not a general, but a friend, a woman whose only crime was loyalty, a woman who would become a vessel for all the hatred meant for her queen. This is the story of a promise kept and the price paid for it in the heart of the storm. This is the execution of Marie Thérèse, the Princess de Lamballe.
The Gilded Cage. Before the blood, there was the dream. There was Versailles, a universe of powdered wigs and silk brocade, of whispered conversations and gilded halls, a place so insulated from the world it might as well have been on the moon. And at the center of this universe, second only to the Queen, was Marie Thérèse. She was not a political creature. She was not a schemer, not an ideologue. She was gentle. Born of the House of Savoy, married into the French aristocracy, and widowed young, she was quiet, sensitive, and prone to fainting spells. She was, by all accounts, a woman of profound kindness in a world that valued wit. Perhaps this is what drew Marie Antoinette to her. The Queen, herself a foreigner, drowning in the complex and venomous etiquette of the French court, found in Lamballe something rare, a confidant, a port in a storm. She was made superintendent of the Queen's household, a position that placed her in the intimate center of the royal family's life. She organized the Queen's amusements. She shared her anxieties. She absorbed her secrets. This bond was genuine. It was deep. And it was poison. Outside the palace gates, the world was starving. While Versailles debated the merits of a new opera, Paris debated the price of bread. Pamphlets, cruel and pornographic, began to circulate. They depicted a queen who was wasteful, foreign, and debauched. And in these lurid fantasies, the queen was never alone. Her favorites, her corrupt inner circle, were depicted alongside her. And the gentlest, the kindest, the most loyal of them all, Princess de Lamballe, was cast as the chief villainess. She was painted as the Queen's evil influence, the puppet master of her excesses. The people, desperate for a target, were given one. They were taught to hate this quiet woman. They were taught to see her not as a person, but as a symbol of everything that was rotten. She was the gatekeeper to the Queen, and when the people decided to tear down the gates, they would tear her down first. The friendship that had been her greatest joy, the source of her life's meaning, was now meticulously, publicly braiding itself into a noose.
The sound of thunder.
Loyalty, in a time of revolution, is not a virtue. It is a crime. The thunder that had been rumbling in the distance for years finally broke in 1789. The Bastille fell. The sound of its stones hitting the ground was an earthquake that shook every throne in Europe. The words liberty, equality, fraternity were spoken as a prayer, and then, very quickly, as a threat. The shield of privilege, once so absolute, was now just a target. As the revolution gained speed, the royal family's world shrank. They were forced from Versailles, that gilded dream, and brought to Paris. They were no longer monarchs. They were prisoners in their own capital, held in the Tuileries Palace. For those, like Lamballe, who were known by their proximity to the crown, the danger was immediate. The ground was opening up. Many of the aristocracy fled, scattering across Europe, becoming the émigrés. They saw the future written on the wall. And Princess de Lamballe? She left too. She was safe. She was in England, in Bath, far from the roar of the crowd, far from the paranoia, far from the smell of the torches. She had escaped. But the Queen had not. From Paris, Marie Antoinette, now a prisoner, wrote to her friend. The letters were desperate. They were the words of a woman who was terrified, isolated, and watching the world end. She did not command Lamballe to return. She simply, terribly, missed her. And so, Princess de Lamballe made a choice. It was a choice that history remembers as either madness or the purest form of devotion. Against the advice of everyone, against the pleas of her family, she turned around. She traveled back into the fire. She went to Paris, walked into the Tuileries Palace, and rejoined the Queen. She knew what she was doing. She was writing her last will and testament before she even crossed the Channel. She had chosen to share the fate of her friend, whatever it might be. She had returned to a city that was hunting for monsters, and in her, with her gentle face and her unwavering loyalty, they saw the monster they had been promised. The return was a sensation. It was seen as proof of a conspiracy, an aristocrat returning to plot with the Austrian queen against the people. Her loyalty, the most human thing about her, was the final, damnable proof of her guilt.
The Last Lock. August 10th, 1792. The final act. The mob, now radicalized and organized, storms the Tuileries. The Swiss Guard are massacred. The palace is ransacked, its splendor torn to pieces. The royal family flees for their lives, taking refuge with the very legislative assembly that is plotting their demise. The monarchy is abolished. The king, the queen, their children, and their few remaining attendants are imprisoned in the medieval, foreboding tower of the temple. Princess de Lamballe is, of course, with them. She will not leave. But the new regime would not allow the queen this one last comfort. On the night of August 19th, officials entered the temple. They came to separate those who were of royal blood from those who were not. Marie Antoinette and Lamballe clung to each other. They had to be physically torn apart. The Queen's cry, it was later written, was not one of a monarch, but of a woman having her last friend ripped from her arms. Princess de Lamballe was taken away, shoved into a carriage, and driven through the dark, menacing streets. She was taken to the La Force prison. And here, the story turns. Paris was descending into a citywide panic. Enemy armies were advancing on France. The new government, led by men like Danton, preached that the enemy was not just at the gates. The enemy was within. The prisons, they claimed, were full of royalists and traitors who were waiting to break out and slaughter the good citizens of Paris while their sons were at the front. It was a lie. But it was a useful one. It gave the mob a license. It gave them a purpose. Starting on September 2nd, the September Massacres began. Mobs, drunk on wine and righteousness, broke into the prisons. They were not riots. They were something worse. They were organized. Makeshift tribunals were set up inside the prison courtyards. Self-appointed judges, butchers, and blacksmiths, still wearing their bloody aprons, sat at tables. They held mock trials, judging the prisoners one by one.
Inside her cell at La Force, Princess de Lamballe could hear it. She could hear the screams. She could hear the roar of the crowd in the courtyard just outside her window. She could hear the thudding, the wet, percussive sounds of the slaughter. She was there, in that stone box, for days. She lay on her cot, ill with terror, listening to the revolution devour its own. She was no longer a princess. She was no longer a friend. She was just next.
The Red Oath. On the morning of September 3rd, her cell door opened. Two men from the National Guard, their faces grim, pulled her from her bed. She was so weak with fear she could barely stand. They half dragged her through the prison corridors, the stone walls slick with filth, the air unbreathable. They pushed her out into the courtyard, into a scene from hell. The tribunal was waiting. A small table stained with wine and something else. Men with pikes, their arms bare and red. And the crowd, the mob, a wall of faces, screaming, waiting. She was brought before the judges. The man presiding, a man named Hébert, a radical journalist whose entire career was built on slandering the Queen, looked at her. The trial, such as it was, began. They accused her of plotting, of corresponding with the enemy, of being the Queen's agent. She denied it. Her voice was barely a whisper. Then came the test, the final question. They offered her an oath. "Swear an oath of liberty and equality," the judge demanded. "I will willingly swear that," she whispered. He wasn't finished. "And an oath of hatred to the king and to the queen." The courtyard went quiet. This was the moment. This was the true trial. They were not asking for her political allegiance. They were asking her to spit on the grave of her friendship. They were asking her to save her own life by voiding the one thing that gave it meaning. She stood, frail, surrounded by a sea of hatred, and she found her voice. "I cannot," she said. "It is not in my heart." They asked her again. They warned her. "Swear the oath, and you will be saved." She refused. "I have nothing to answer. To die a little sooner or a little later is a matter of indifference to me. I have made the sacrifice of my life." The judge, Hébert, watched her. He knew what this refusal meant. He turned to the crowd. He could not be seen to be soft. He pronounced the chilling, coded sentence. "Then she must be released." The guards grabbed her. They pushed her toward the great prison doors. They opened them. What she saw was not freedom. It was a wall of noise, a forest of pikes, of hatchets, of raised crude weapons. The roar of the crowd hit her like a physical blow. She was pushed out into their arms. The mob swallowed her whole. The witnesses inside the prison heard a single, short scream quickly stifled, and then only the roar. The sound of a final, terrible, frenzied release. The sky over Paris, it was said, was a bruised, sickly gray. The Head of the Medusa.
The mob had unmade a woman. Now they would use her to unmake a queen. The horror did not end with her death. It had only just begun. Her death was a murder. What followed was a ritual. The crowd, in its bloody ecstasy, paraded her remains through the streets. This was a grotesque, triumphant procession, a river of furies flowing through Paris. Their destination was the Temple Tower. They had killed the friend. Now they would show her to the Queen. Inside, the royal family heard the noise, the loudest they had ever heard. The crowd surged against the walls, screaming a name, Lamballe. As the family gathered at the window, the mob was relentless, raising something high on a pike for the queen to see. It was her head. Reports of that moment are fractured by horror. A guard allegedly shouted, "Don't look!" but it was too late. Marie Antoinette saw it. She did not scream. She made no sound. She simply collapsed to the floor in a dead faint, remaining unconscious, like a corpse, for hours. This was the true execution. The mob had not just killed a princess, they had used her as a weapon to kill the spirit of the queen. They held up the head of her dearest friend as a mirror to show her what was coming. That single silent feint was the moment Marie Antoinette truly understood all hope was lost. The death of Princess de Lamballe became the definitive dark emblem of the September Massacres. It was the point of no return, the moment the revolution stopped being about ideals and started being about pure, unadulterated vengeance. It was a warning that nothing, not kindness, not loyalty, was sacred anymore. The ideals of 1789, liberty, equality, fraternity, were noble, born of a righteous desire for justice. But in the shadow of the guillotine, in the stench of the prisons, those ideals rotted. The revolution became a machine that demanded fuel. It began by tearing down a prison and ended by turning the entire nation into one. The tragedy of Marie-Thérèse de Lamballe is not that a princess died, it is that a person died, for no other reason than that she was a friend. She was killed not for what she did, but for what she represented. Her loyalty, a simple human virtue, became a capital crime. Her execution was not an act of justice. It was a human sacrifice. It was the moment the revolution, in its hunger to destroy monsters, became one itself. And in the dark, frantic heart of Paris, the bells continued to toll, ringing in a new age of reason, while the cobblestones themselves ran red, a testament to the terrible, enduring price of vengeance.